Hello again and welcome to another Warhammer 40k Imperial Guard tactics video. Today we're going to be continuing our series on the artillery of the Imperial Guard and the fundamental principles of using these big guns. How you can use it the most effective way and the most efficient way. So in our previous episode we talked about how you can use the artillery in a supporting role. How it is supplementary firepower and not fundamental firepower. Now if you want to see that video and understand what those terms mean, then don't worry, I will link it at the end of this episode. But today, guys, we are not talking about supplementary or fundamental firepower. We are going to be talking about harassing firepower, which is another incredibly important way of using your artillery. Now, unlike supplementary firepower, where the main damage isn't coming from the artillery, it's coming from something else like a tank commander, and all that the artillery is going to do is finish off what the tank commanders couldn't quite finish themselves. Harassing firepower is going to be essentially entirely based around what you can do with just your artillery. So we won't be using any other units involved here. We'll be talking about how you can concentrate artillery barrages to really mess with your opponent's plans. And that idea of messing with your opponent's plans, that really is the core. That is the fundamental principle of what you're trying to achieve with harassing firepower. You're trying to distract your opponent. You're trying to mess up his game plan. You're trying to take his eye away from the main push that he's trying to do and direct it to other areas. You're harassing his plan and overall you're just being a pain in the arse. That is the point of harassing firepower. So let's talk about some examples of what you can do with your artillery to achieve harassing fire. Now, a classic example of harassing firepower and the way to use it effectively is to mess with your opponent's backfield objective. 40k games are relatively simple. There are objectives that are in no man's land and there are objectives that are in deployment zones. And what you're trying to do with your harassing firepower in this scenario is to mess with your opponent's backfield objective, the one that is in his deployment zone. Now, a lot of 40k players, it's a fundamental competitive tactic that a lot of people do, and you can do this tactic as well, is they will put something that's fairly cheap holding their backfield objective whilst they push forward with the majority of their army, whilst they put all of their exciting points into big units that they can smash the enemy with. And those units are important because they're going to be pushing into the center of the board where the majority of the fighting is going to happen. However, this approach to 40k does have a fundamental weakness which harassing firepower is great at exploiting. It relies upon the fact that your opponent is going to be able to put a small unit, maybe it's 5 intercessors or tactical marines or legionnaires, maybe it's something like a few guardians or genestealer cultists or Gretchen, something weak and cheap and not very durable at all. It relies upon the fact that you won't be able to interact with them. Oh, they're going to be hidden out of line of sight. You won't be able to interact with them. But thanks to artillery, thanks to the ability to just ignore line of sight, and thanks to the fact that as per the latest balanced data slate, Guard have the best artillery, and pretty much no one else is taking artillery, it means that more and more people are reverting to this strategy, and then when they come across a Guard player with some artillery, it is an Achilles heel to their game plan. Because you can quite easily use 2, 3, 4 artillery pieces. Maybe they're 3 squads of mortars and a basilisk, maybe a couple of mortars and a medusa, something like that. You can easily use those units to concentrate firepower and pick up this not very durable unit that is actually a linchpin to your opponent's plans. Now, why is this backfield unit so important, and why is taking it out of the equation going to be so disrupting, so annoying for your opponent? Well, the reason it's so important is it's guaranteeing him at the very least some primary points. If you're playing in a 5 objective game, every turn that opponent has his little 5-10 man chaff unit on the backfield objective, he's scoring 4 primary points. However, if you take it off him, he's not holding an objective, and he may not even be holding one in the middle of the board, so he might not score any primary. Now, this whole thing of denying the opponent any primary really comes into play if you're playing on a 6 objective game, where typically you have to hold 2 primary objectives to even just get 4 primary victory points. Now, if you take that backfield objective off your opponent and he's pushed into the center, but you've used your infantry to contest several of the objectives, maybe he's only got 1 objective in the midfield, that one objective suddenly becomes useless because he isn't holding two objectives, not holding that backfield one, and so you are denying your opponent victory points. And if you deny him victory points, you are helping yourself win the game. You're not just killing things, we're taking this into an extra dimension now, a bit of a more big brain move over the whole idea of supporting firepower. We're not just talking about killing things, we're really talking about messing with your opponent's victory points, messing with his plans to achieve victory. And another really important effect of this harassing firepower is it messes with your opponent's front line push. Because either your opponent has got to divert resources from the main push, send them back towards the backfield objective. Now he knows that you can pick up cheap chaff units. He's going to have to send something a little bit more substantial back to hold it, which means he's not having that substantial unit pushing forward into the mid board. So either he's got to do that, which weakens his push, or he's got to, if he recognizes the threat at the beginning of the game, he's probably going to leave a few more units behind at the start, which means you're weakening his push from turn one. So either way, you're weakening the push, or you've got to put your opponent into a very risky situation where your opponent essentially goes for broke. If this was like a video game, you'd call it maybe go for like a base trade, where your opponent has got to fully commit to taking those midfield objectives, fully commit to maybe even trying to take your home objective off you. Now that is a very risky strategy because it means he's got to be able to push forward and overwhelm you. Rather than just trying to contest the middle field, he's got to try and push forward. He's got to ask more of those units that he's thrown into the middle of the board. And if you are playing Imperial Guard right, you're going to have a lot of infantry. You're going to be having 100 and 120 infantry, if not 150 infantry. And that means that there's a lot of bodies your opponent's got to chew through, and your opponent is against the clock. Because you have got your backfield objective and you're contesting the middle objectives. He might only have 3 turns left to try and take your backfield objective off you, or sufficiently reduce your capability to contest those middle field objectives. Let me tell you from pure bitter experience, 99% of the time, what your opponent will do is he will divert forces back. He will send forces back to try and hold his home objective, because that is actually the safer option. However, be aware that you will play against some very aggressive armies, some very competitive players who will go absolutely all in. And if you're not ready for that, they might actually overwhelm you. So just be aware of it. Now, we've talked a lot about harassing firepower on backfield objectives, but this principle totally applies to flanking objectives as well, especially if you're playing on a big 6 objective board where there are 4 strung out across the middle. It's not uncommon for your opponent to send a couple of weak units down the left flank or down the right flank, or possibly even down both, whilst he's really pushing into the center too, and he's trying to focus you onto those center 2 objectives. And what you've got to try and do is use your harassing firepower to keep an eye on the flanks. Now, a great example of opponents that like to do this are Custodes players. They love to drop down single Terminators onto a left flank or onto a right flank, or a single character here and there running up the flanks. They love to do that shit. And so if you can really just not be drawn into those center 2 objectives. You want to be fighting for them, you want to be playing for them, don't get me wrong, you really want to be playing the center objective game, but be keeping an eye on those flanks. And if all it takes for you is send 20 guardsmen up the left flank, 20 guardsmen up the right flank, and have a couple of basilisks and mortars and whatnot supporting each one of those small platoons, you're going to find that you'll be able to overwhelm those little harassing flanking forces that are trying to sneak points away from you when you're not concentrating. So harassing firepower is not only good at harassing the opponent, it's really good at shutting down your opponent's attempts to try and harass you or sneak things past you when you're focused with that tunnel vision on the central big brawl fight. Now, I know what some of you are going to be asking. Mordian Glory, what is the best way? What is the priority when it comes to supplementary firepower and when it comes to harassing firepower? Well, honestly, guys, it's really going to come down to the kind of game that you're playing. If you're playing against an opponent who is all gas, no brakes, really putting the screws to you, really going all in and being super aggressive, more likely than not, for the first few turns at the very least, you're going to need to use supplementary firepower, because you need to be able to stabilize your front line. You're going to need to be able to stop the opponents from overwhelming your infantry too quickly. You need to be able to dampen his firepower with your firepower. Okay, so what I tend to find is you play supplementary firepower for a turn or two, and when it gets to that sort of key turn 2, turn 3 moment, that's when you can potentially switch into harassing firepower. However, if you're playing against a slower opponent that you know you're going to have more time to let your tank commanders do the work, that your infantry aren't going to be getting picked up by the handful by turn 1, then you can really switch into harassing firepower straight away. It really is going to come down to your opponent, and it's going to come down to basically bitter experience, guys. Just play more games, get a feel for using your artillery in these ways, and very quickly you'll start realizing, okay, I'm playing a game now where my opponent is really aggressive. I can't actually afford to let my frontline units take this much of a beating. I need to be supporting them. Or you're going to be like, okay, yeah, I'm playing against like a foot-slogging Custodes army. I know I'm going to have time for my tank commanders to pick him up. I need to be diverting those big units away. You know, those big Sagittarius, need to be diverting them away. That's where we're going to switch to harassing firepower. Sorry, this is the Silence you're stuck on your backfield objective. Sorry, the 3 Custodians stuck on the backfield objective. We're going to be picking those up in a turn or two, and now you're going to have to start diverting your resources, and then really your slow push is going to be really blunted. So it is going to come down to basically the kind of armies that you're going to be facing. If you were really to twist my arm and say, Morning Glory, please give me some examples of armies that you think you can use harassing firepower and supplementary firepower, what I would say is when you're facing armies like Blood Angels, lots of Sanguinary Guard or Death Company, when you're facing things like Harlequins, those are the kind of armies where more than likely you're going to be forced to use your artillery in a supplementary firepower role, at least for a turn or 2, or maybe even 3. But if you're facing slower armies, and I've referenced these guys once or twice before, like Custodes, or maybe even Necrons, although obviously the Necrons can build in a variety of ways, but you know, maybe a slower, more Necron warrior blob type force, that's where you're going to be given the chance to use harassing firepower. But that's all we've got time for today. I hope you've enjoyed today's video and you found it useful. If you have, please consider giving the video a like. And if you want to see more tactics content like this, more principles about how you can use those fundamental units in your Imperial Guard army, then try subscribing to the channel to make sure that you never miss an episode. Let me know what you think down in the comment section below. Do you think there's other ways that you can use your artillery? What do you think? Have I ever missed anything? Have I made any mistakes? Let me know down in the comment section below. I'm very much open to feedback. If you really enjoyed today's video and you want to see more content like this and support my channel, then please consider becoming a channel member or Patreon supporter. It's thanks to the channel members and the patrons that I'm able to do Mordian Glory full time. I'm able to talk about these principles, do daily videos and more content on top of that as well. So if you really want to see more stuff like that, consider becoming a channel member or patron. And I just want to take a moment now to do a shout out to all the latest people that have decided to support me. So a massive thank you to Travis Wyckoff, Boris the Conqueror, Colin Ford, Grimnar, Pretax Foil, Born Not to Run, Wayne Catlin, Bonsai Kitty Gaming, Dead Tone, Samuel Martin, Alastrom Aurelius, Mark Flanagan and Ernest Brown. Thank you guys for becoming channel members. Thank you for doing your part. Also, a big thank you to Moon Prune, 700th Black Templar, Waiting for Something to Happen, Nick Hooper, Leo King Art, Alex Hines, Kadia4 and Dominic Griffin for becoming Patreon supporters. Thank you guys. I really appreciate your ongoing Patreon support. And last but certainly not least, I need to say a big thank you, a personal thank you to all of my top tier Patreon supporters, the War Masters. So a big 07 down in the comment section for Navy Veteran, Philip French, Ross Miller, Taqual, Alex Dengal, John Stubbs, Nicholas Walsh, Swordfish Trombone, Diesel Fox, Tom Sutton, and of course, August Varney. Thank you guys for going the extra mile. Thank you for going above and beyond the call of duty. You're all absolute mega bosses. I hope you've all enjoyed today's video. Thank you for watching, and of course, as always, I'll see you guys next time.